Hello. I'd love to welcome you all from wherever you are to Hope Sparks Spotlights, where I zero in on amazing people working in education innovation. And today I'd like you to meet Julia Black. As an innovative educationalist, neurocoach, and serial entrepreneur, Julia's worked with thousands of families to introduce a culture of learning that leads to high performance. She helps mothers become inspiring leaders so their families can make a positive contribution to our world by unlocking the code to their fullest human potential. Sounds pretty good to me. Julia is a writer. She's written an ebook, The Real Reason Your Child Doesn't Want to Learn, which has diagnostic tools for parents to understand their children as learners. She's also the founder and lead on Lights On. Julia, I'd love to pass the mic over to you and for you to share, because we have parents listening, we have educators from around the world. Could you share what Lights On is? Where did it start? How did it spark?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. I guess this adventure started back 15 years ago when my daughter started school. So I'm a parent to two children, and she started school age 4, as we do here in the UK, which is incredibly young. And I thought she was going to be fine. She didn't seem to have the dyslexia that's within my family, and she was an early reader. And I just kind of hit up against, I guess, her becoming quite bored really early on, as young as 4. And realized, okay, I'm going to have to supplement what we do here. So I just started exploring solutions really, and began to flex the system to work for her and then later for my son. That adventure led me to opening up my own creative learning center when I took my daughter out of school, age 9, because she was saying, "This, you might as well send me to prison." And that's really when I began to take my work as an educator, I guess, an accidental educator, to more beyond my family. So I began to work with children and schools, actually, and ended up with a centre on a school site. But Lights On, Lights Off really became from that, me trying to find I've always wanted to find a different way to assess children and to see how will we know they're learning, was the question parents always asked me if we don't test them. And I had a meeting with a business strategist who had known my father, and he said, "Well, how do you know?" And I said, "Well, it's simple. You see it in their eyes. It's like their lights have come on." And he said, "Well, there you go. Lights on, lights off." And I loved in that moment, I was like, can it be that simple? Could we actually revolutionize the way that the lens that we look through, and the way that we kind of track achievement levels and bring mental well-being right into the heart of the education system? So Lights On really is a state of being. It's what we're thinking and feeling at any given moment that affects the choices that we make, the actions that we take, and therefore the results that we get. And where I've come to in my journey now, having worked with, like you say, thousands of families online, is really also understanding the importance of the lights off state, which is where it gets really exciting, because left to on its own, it's a survival state. When we harness the power and the potential within it, it becomes a growth state. And this is the missing piece that I believe that families are struggling with. Head teachers that I'm beginning to talk with now are struggling with, the children become passive learners. How do we get them switched back on? And I believe we do it by finding that thing that makes you see it in their eyes when their lights come on.
Oh, I love that. And when we first connected, I was really excited about the idea of lights on and lights off, because I too, working in education, it's a very simple metric. You can see it if you're aware. I really connected with your support of parents and how their conditioning and their paradigms and all their training and education can get in the way, dare I say, with young people. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we think about it, our generation has all gone through the old school model. So the sort of, which I kind of think is an outside in model. It's a consumption model. where we, there's a standard that we, aim to meet. And the human potential, I believe, really comes alive and into its own when we learn from the inside out. So there's this cultural gap or gulf, really, it's quite big, between the parents of this generation and where our children are. And I love hanging out in that space because to me, I love talking about cultures of learning and growth. So much of the work I do is helping parents transform as leaders by really looking at their own fears of what happens if they allow themselves to step off the old paradigm, not necessarily step out of it, because I think we can actually evolve the system much more when parents do get involved. And what happens when they let go of trying to control the outcome of their education that they're, bringing into their children. And what happens when we achieve that transformation, when we really look at the fears, the lights off neurocircuitry, which is, but what if I let them down? What if, all of this amazing talk about, heart-led learning actually doesn't set them up for life. So once we look at those fears, then it's quite, we begin the rewiring process. But
rewiring, to interrupt you, rewiring for parents and children, right?
Yes, it has to.
It's so important to just stop and think about that for listeners. This is not just only about the children. This is the system, which is the parents and educators.
And it's so important that because the adults around a child set the energetic tone for that child, right? So if we are lights off as leaders, which when I talk to a lot of educators, they are because of, the sort of obstacles that they feel they're facing. When I coach a lot of parents, they're lights off because seeing a child disengage and disconnect from learning is, it's uncomfortable. And so we go into sort of survival mode ourselves, trying to fix that problem. But it's the neurocircuitry. So I always like to talk about the neurocircuitry, right? When we can connect the heart with the brain again, and we get the whole body firing up, firing and wiring together the neural networks. In the parent, the whole energetic tone within that family shifts. And now, instead of coming from a fear-based perspective of like, my child's not doing their homework or my child's not interested in any of the projects I design, I can't get my child to, create, they're always consuming, which is quite a fear-based response. You stack the evidence, you look for the micro wins, and you have this utter belief in your heart and in your core that your child is capable of achieving incredible things. And from that place, now we know that child has someone who 100% believes in them. And that to me is when you look at what makes a good educator, they believe that any child can achieve incredible things when they're given that opportunity and when we hold the space for them to do so.
Oh, so true. And I've watched this happen with my own 14-year-old daughter who, when we ended up, she'd left the system. It was scary. And it was like stepping off a cliff of the what ifs and other people's judgments and the system being concerned about her well-being and her future. And she seemed to have this confidence, but she was looking to me like you look at flight attendants when you have turbulence on the plane. If my mom's okay, then I must be okay. So I began to work with people like you to surround myself with this confidence. And I want to hear practically what your program looks like for parents, because I think what I needed most was like-minded or supportive structure to keep my confidence going so that then her confidence could grow that muscle. And now it's thriving and she needs less of me all the time. But that early stage was really important. So I'd love to hear what does it look like for you to support parents?
Yeah, so the parents I work with kind of know in their heart they're here to make a difference in the world, and they want to play their role in evolving the education system, in some way, whether that's either home educating or involved in the school. And they know and recognize that they are part of the problem, that they are putting obstacles in the way for their family of learners that don't necessarily need to be there. And so with that, they also recognize they are the solution. So it's a lovely moment when a parent realizes wow, if I am the solution, how empowering is that? I no longer need to blame anyone. I no longer need to feel, without any hope. I can really take ownership of this. So the first stage, once they've made that leap, is to kind of then really look at their neurocircuitry. How lights on are you? And my framework is 5 steps to it. It's the lights on learn model. And the L is all about lights on neurocircuitry, lights on learning, lights on leadership. So we hang out there for a bit to get that parent looking at their limiting beliefs, rewiring and really stacking the evidence of they can do this, and being okay to, get things wrong along the way. Then I'll guide them into creating a period of exploration. So the E is really about exploring. And what's important for any education delivery to have in place is a chance for a child to explore what they're naturally good at. So I'm always looking at what are you naturally good at, that if we could invest time and nurturing and coaching, you would get great at it over a lifetime. So we want to explore without any attachment to the outcome. One of the biggest obstacles that I work with parents.
Explore without attachment to the outcome.
Exactly, because the next stage is activate your potential. And that's when we can focus in on an outcome. So there's 2 very distinct kind of sort of stages that I work with. And then during the activate your potential, I'm always looking to work with children, teens or adults to move them from being consumers, which is when we take in the information and it feels good, we use our brain and not just our mind, to become creators led from what we've got on our heart's desire. So I talk about heart set, mindset and skill set. And when we bring in the heart set, I always like to think that when we're led by our heart, we are lights on, right? When we are led by our head, lights off comes into play much more. And if we try and work on our mindset without our heart set in place, we will always tend to stay within our comfort zone or use old school strategies of pushing through and, I'll keep going no matter what, like clench our fists and, willpower. But when we combine heart set and mindset, now we can bring in much more kind of intuitive practices, trusting in wisdom, doing less, achieving more, being rather than doing, and using our energy in a different way.
Alignment, where I say, I wish that we as grown-ups had been taught more of this when we were younger. So
exactly. It's exactly that, aligning. And then, of course, when you're leading with your heart set, your heart is always going to have a bigger dream than your mind is ready to deliver on, which is why, again, the visioning process, even by just asking a child who's maybe struggling with writing, for example, would you want to learn to write? And then when they say yes, now we've started their brain to kind of go, that's where I'm heading. I'm actually heading on that journey to learn to write. So in the activate your potential is where we kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting with the mindset, but with the heart set locked in. And then we bring in skill set, which is the skills that I'm going to need to learn to deliver on my dream. And so those 3 in particular are really important. And we get the children creating, and then we can bring in tools like draft critique, real world learning. We give briefs, we give deadlines and things like that. And whilst we still detach from the outcome needing to be a certain way, we are looking at, well, where have we arrived and where are we now? We meet the children where they are, and then we just look at how do we move you one step forward. And then the R of the framework is where we do the rewiring, we use reflection. For me, reflection is like one of the best growth tools, and I think it's underutilized. And then we can go to the end, which is navigate to the next level. And so I look at learning as a spiral. It's like we could just cycle around these sort of, mountains for a lifetime, going deeper and deeper and deeper.
A lifetime. It's not start and end.
Yeah.
And it also isn't just that, conventional path of going to uni and then finishing that. And then you do what everyone else is doing. It gives so much autonomy and empowerment.
Yeah. And when you look at learning like this, I guess it's mastery learning, but then the learning landscape becomes like a fractal. The deeper you go, the simpler it seems, but the less you know, and so you get locked into that quest. And, I'm sure you've experienced this, and probably many of the parents, when you find that thing that you really believe, I was born to do this, it leads to that fulfillment. It leads to living purposefully, every single day. And also what's really important is it leads to lots of light, soft moments for us to then use those to grow, to be able to take the bigger, bolder step that we might be ready to take tomorrow. So for me, there is no other way to learn, really.
I'm so glad I found you, and I'm looking forward to spreading lights on to more people. Julia, before we end, I would really love you to share any words for parents on the edge of doing things differently with their child's learning. What would you share with them?
I would just say, really listen to your heart. Get really clear on your vision, what you want, and importantly, how you want to feel every day that you wake up. And if you tune into that, that is the locking in of the heart set, and that will become your inner compass, and you can just keep returning to that. It's less about what you're doing, the outside in model. It's more about who you are being from the inside out. So lock in that dream, that vision for what you want for your family, and then the steps will naturally unfold.
Oh, I love it, and love your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.